WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. Navigating Neurodiversity. Creating Websites with Inclusivity in Mind. With speaker Christina Workman, Front-End Technical Manager at AmericanEagle.com. This presentation was recorded October 2024.
Excellent. Here we are at WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. My name is Jessica Sams from Yolantis Website Mentor. Thanks for joining us for navigating neurodiversity, creating websites with inclusivity in mind with Christina Workman. Please feel free to add your questions in the Zoom Q&A section as you think of them, and we will do our best to respond at the end of the section. At the end of this session, use the chat to connect with other attendees or receive any information from our technical support. I'm going to introduce Christina Workman. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me. All right. I guess
I'll go ahead and tell the team about you.
All right.
So Christina Workman is a front-end technical manager at AmericanEagle.com who values collaboration, knowledge sharing, and community. She has a knack for translating tech talk into everyday English and a passion for fostering awareness of web accessibility. A self-proclaimed purpleophile, Christina also enjoys a nice mug of tea while watching British murder mysteries and snuggling her two adorable dogs. Go ahead and take it away, Christina.
All righty.
Yes, I see your slides.
All right. Well, good. Hello again, everybody. My name is Christina Workman, and I am excited to talk to you about navigating neurodisabilities, creating websites with inclusivity in mind. If you need to or want to follow along with the slides and haven't grabbed them from the event site yet, you can grab them there, or also at christinaworkman.ca/WPAD2024. That's my name, CHRISTINAWORKMAN.ca/WPAD2024. So a little bit about me. I am a front-end technical manager at AmericanEagle.com, and that's our eagle logo there on this slide as well. I've been there for about 2.5 years, and it's been, I just have to say, a really great company, and it has helped me a lot learning more and more accessibility tips and tricks. I live in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and I like to relax with British murder mysteries and a giant cup of tea, my pups, and anything slothy. That is my favorite little animal right now. So a little bit about me and accessibility and why this particular subject is important to me. As I mentioned about learning at American Eagle more about accessibility, I started my learning journey in the area of accessibility about 6 years ago. And as you, I'm sure, are also aware, constantly learning, there's always new things to learn. And so really always looking forward to carrying on that journey of learning. Myself, I have increasingly poor eyesight. These glasses have now been upgraded to progressives or modern day bifocals, but I still find myself lifting my glasses up to read things, hold things close to my face and read them. I also experience frequent temporary disabilities, so not so much related to websites, but I have had so many broken bones in the last few years, I've lost track. And then I also get migraines fairly frequently. One of the downfalls of living in Calgary, actually, I think it's the migraine capital of Canada. So that affects me frequently as well. And I come from, or I belong to rather, what I like to call a neuro-fun family. We're all neurodivergent in some flavor or another, and it helps keep things interesting, but it definitely has made me more and more aware of how websites can impact somebody's ability to use them. So our agenda for this talk, we'll start off with what are neurological disabilities, talk a little bit about that, and then go into some of the types of neurological disabilities, keeping in mind that this is by no means anywhere near a complete list of neurological disabilities, and the ones we're going to talk about in a bit of detail are the more permanent disabilities. But again, remembering that you can have situational or temporary disabilities with neurological or disabilities as well. And then we'll go through some real life examples and get some website tips on what to do and what not to do to make your site easier for people with neurodisabilities to navigate. So first up, what are neurodisabilities besides being a really long word hard to pronounce sometimes? So neurodisabilities are disorders or disabilities that affect the nervous system. So that covers the brain, nerves, and the spinal cord. It's a pretty complex system. So you can imagine, as I mentioned, there are a lot of different types of disabilities and disorders that this covers. And all of these are important to be considering when you're building your website. And if anybody's curious about the image on here, it might be a little bit hard to see just because of the pastel colors, but it's sort of a, not quite a watercolor, but it's an image of a brain, including the brain stem and all of that. Okay, so I just wanted to talk about some terminology briefly before we get into things too far. The first one is neurodisability, neurological disability versus cognitive disability. Um, I've I've heard feedback that some people aren't keen on the word neurodisability and prefer cognitive, and I know that that also can happen the opposite way. I know this happens in a lot of different communities where there's sort of a preferred term to use. I looked up to sort of get more information and found that neurodisability is more of an all-encompassing term that includes cognitive disabilities, but cognitive refers more specifically to processes of the brain like memory, speech, and problem solving. So to keep things sort of consistent throughout this presentation, I'm going to stick to neurodisabilities because it really is all of these different types of disabilities that can affect the things that I'm talking about. The other terms that I wanted to sort of discuss is the word disability versus a difference or any other type of word. I know that there are, again, some people who don't necessarily look at their how they are in some of the terms. So for example, to take one in particular, uh, autistic people. I know from being involved in that community that there's a lot of people who don't like using the word disability when talking about autism because they don't feel like it's a disability necessarily, and or that it's a disorder. It's more of a difference in way the brain works. And so again, completely want to respect that, but also recognizing that while that is a difference, when you're in the minority group with the difference, how you perceive and interact with the world, you can encounter disabilities, as opposed to not, being part of the bigger majority. So I just want to make sure, I know we're talking about accessibility, but I don't want to accidentally offend anybody. So again, talked a little bit about this, but why I care about neurodisabilities. Family history, like I said, in my family, my son, and he gives me permission to talk about him. He has officially been diagnosed with 4 of the different types of disabilities that we're going to be discussing. And so those disabilities have had a huge impact on his life. But if you were to meet him on the street, you wouldn't look at him and go, oh, he has disabilities. And even if you were to hang out with him for an afternoon, you still might not think that he has any disabilities. But I guarantee you, as his mother, I have seen he has struggles with various different things. His disabilities are real. But there's some people who, have even said to me, oh, he's just a kid. He'll grow out of that. He's not a kid anymore. He has not grown out of it. He will not grow out of it. So again, this is just one of those things that has really impacted my life. And so I just sort of see how it affects websites in general, as well as I'm working with them. Also, we've got the prevalence in the tech industry. There are a lot of people who work in our industry, whether it's by fluke or, whichever studies you want to quote, but we do have a fairly high prevalence of things like ADHD and autism, and other various neurodisabilities in our industry. So again, hits close to home, something that I witness every day in my colleagues and my family. And then the last thing is, in my 6 or so years of learning about accessibility, working on accessibility remediation, I found that it's harder to call out some of the issues that we see on websites. It's because it's less quantifiable. So you can't, you don't get a lot of things coming through on automated tests, which we know don't show all of the issues on a site, but even within the fraction that they do show, it's not so often the neurodisability issues that they find. It's usually various other ones that are kind of more easy to catch. Um, so that's, again, a little bit about me and why this is really important to me. So neurodisabilities, I like to think of as the Linux OS of the accessibility world. So I like to think if Family Feud did one of their top 10 surveys, probably not top 10, but it said, we asked 100 people, what operating system does your computer use? You're going to see a lot of PCs and Macs, and there will be a nice little group of Linux there. Again, mostly tech people, probably. But those top 2 answers are going to be PC, Windows, and Mac. And if you did a similar survey about disabilities, you're going to see a lot more of, if you ask people, what do we need to consider for website accessibility? You're going to see some more answers. There'll be more than 2 main ones, but the minority answer, from what I've found, is neurological disabilities. So when I talk about that and say, like, most of the time you're going to get these other answers and not so much the neurodisabilities, you can kind of look and see for yourself. If you were to Google or use whatever other search engine you wanted to use and search up online tips or just tips for accessibility fixes for websites, your usual search results are going to be for visual disabilities, physical disabilities, and audio disabilities. Those, things like alt text, color contrast, font sizes, keyboard navigation, all important things, but it's a lot less likely that you're going to see on a top 10 list something to do with neurodisability. So as I mentioned, neurological disabilities are often overlooked and also under-considered. They're not usually accommodated with overlay plugins. Some of them are, if you have, say, dyslexia. There's, I know, some different settings for that, but a lot of them are not something that can be accommodated with an overlay plugin. And then they actually affect a larger population than you might expect, again, particularly in the tech community. But when we talk about the fact that there are temporary and situational disabilities too, at some point, I really find it hard to believe that there is anybody who has never experienced a neurological disability before. So hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll have a little bit more of an appreciation for how people visiting your site every day may be using it well, or conversely struggling with it. All right, so let's talk about some actual neurodisabilities. And again, please note, these are by no means a complete list. These are also brief, generalized. They're not a complete description. This is more to do with focusing on elements that are relative to interacting with websites. So first up, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So this impacts part of the brain that helps us plan, focus on, and execute tasks. So somebody with ADHD may have difficulty focusing. They might be easily distracted. Those two things are actually not the same. They may have short-term memory issues, and they may have difficulty making decisions. All of these things could come into play when they're using a website. And here I've got a picture of a little boy who's at sort of a fork in the path. You could go this way or that way, trying to make a decision, sort of trying to represent that difficulty making decisions aspect. Next up, autism, which I've briefly touched upon already. This is a group of conditions that can cause social, communication, and behavioral challenges. Typically, autistic people are very literal thinkers. They can be direct and have very to-the-point communication. They can experience sensory processing overload, and they frequently prefer consistency, dependability, and uniformity. And just to sort of help make the point of the very literal thinkers, I've got this image here of, oh, I've forgotten his name. I'm not a big Guardians of the Galaxy person, but it's a character from Guardians of the Galaxy saying, "Nothing goes over my head. My reflexes are too fast. I would catch it." And that just makes me think of my son every time I see that. Um, oops, not go. There we go. Okay, so then we also have learning disabilities. And this is a wide variety of information processing problems that prevent a person from learning a new skill and using it effectively. And so we see learning disabilities with reading, which is dyslexia, writing, which is dysgraphia, processing numbers, which is dyscalculia, and I'm pretty sure there's a couple other ones, but these are just the ones that I wanted to address tonight. And really important to note, these are not related in any way to intelligence. So somebody having a learning disability doesn't mean that they aren't as smart. It just means that they have this processing problem that makes things a little bit harder. Not impossible, just harder. And I hope this image of numbers and letters isn't too crazy for it's actually starting to bother me. And then we've got memory impairments. So inability to remember information, which can come from a variety of other disabilities or disorders, or can just be its own issue on its own. So we've had short or long-term memory impairments. We have things like dementia, concussion, PTSD. Those are all things that will affect memory in very specific ways. But then there's also working memory, which is what can you keep in? So as an example, if somebody were to say to you, what is 5 plus 2? You store those two numbers in your head as you're adding them. And so somebody with working memory may not remember those very, very short things that they're using right now. So they may not be able to carry on other tasks that sort of follow from that. And so my favorite memory loss icon is Dory here from Finding Nemo. And I believe this is the last one, mental health. This is something that I don't think a lot of people consider when we're talking about neurodisabilities, but it absolutely can have an impact in a variety of ways. So mental health can affect cognitive, emotional, and behavioral well-being. and it basically affects how we think, feel, and act. There's again a variety of different disorders and disabilities here, some including paranoia, schizophrenia, depression, and anxiety. People with some of these mental health issues could experience difficulty focusing, difficulty processing or understanding information. And an interesting thing that I recently learned was that, or didn't really necessarily think of in this way, but even if the mental health issues themselves aren't causing difficulties or struggles, the effects of their medication that they may be taking could have side effects that impact. So some medication side effects are blurred vision or hand tremors. So those kinds of things could also affect disability, affect websites accessibility. Oh, I was wrong. There's one more. Seizure and vestibular disorders. This is the one that you will probably find when you're doing that top 10 accessibility fixes. So these are disorders that can cause seizures or other issues with the vestibular system, which is your inner ear and brain connection. So these are things like epilepsy, migraines, nausea, and dizziness. And so this, lots of times you might find things about like don't have flashing things or like movement. And that's usually related to the epilepsy, at least is the first thing that people tend to think of when thinking about those kinds of things with websites. But it does affect all kinds of different things. Like I said, with my migraines, if it's really bad, I have a really hard time looking at websites in general. And so if there are different things happening that we're going to talk about in a little bit, they can actually make my migraine worse or make it really extra hard for me to be looking at a screen and dealing with what's going on. And then, so I've got this image here of what I'm pretty sure is a path with trees down each side, and it's completely blurred and swirled. So you've got that feeling of dizziness and potentially nausea. Hopefully you don't, though, from looking at that. So now that you've got an understanding of what people with neurological disabilities might be experiencing with your website, or at least how they may be dealing with things for themselves that may impact their experience on your website, how can you ensure that you are making your best efforts to make your website accessible for this group of people so that it's a pleasant and successful experience? Because also at the end of the day, this is about you and your website. If you're trying to convert, people can't navigate your site, you won't get those conversions. So again, this is not a comprehensive list, but a few tips hopefully to get you started in the right direction. And you may actually already be familiar with some of these, whether it's for some of these basic accessibility tips that you may have heard of. It could be because of something else like SEO that sometimes comes into play as you learn some of these things. And then even just, if you're a content writer or if you're a front-end developer, you may just have experienced these as best practices and maybe don't even know why they're the best practice for websites. So hopefully this will give you a little bit more information and a little bit more ground to stand on if you ever have to convince somebody that this is the right way to go. So we'll start with text alignment. You might instinctively do this because it's just sort of what we've gotten used to with web, but left align is usually the best thing to go with text. Some people just feel like it looks more modern, more professional, but it also does have benefits to people who are easily distracted, people who are having trouble focusing, people with reading disabilities, lots of different people. And a lot of these actually, your average Joe kind of person would also sometimes have these issues when we go too far, too intense with some of these different don'ts that we're going to look at. So the do here is left align text. There are two don'ts. So don't center and don't justify. These are not, well, the centering I'll say is not an absolute. I don't think on web you should ever justify though. But you can see here, and I know it's a bit hard on a monitor if, if we had a really big screen or bigger examples. I'm not very good at flipping between slides and the internet in a demo, so I can't do it that way, but trying to give you an example here of this is what centered text looks like. And the longer it is, the harder, if you can imagine reading across and after several lines, trying at the end of one line, trying to figure out where the next line starts when they're all jagged and there's no sort of rhyme or reason to it. It can get really difficult. So that's one of the reasons to not center. Sometimes if it's short text, just a couple of lines, it's not too bad. But when we have long lines like this, long paragraphs, wide paragraphs, it can be really hard to read centered text. Justified text, and this is where you've got the text goes all the way to the left and all the way to the right, so you end up with bigger, different sized gaps in between words. This is something that we're used to seeing in books, in print, but when it comes to online, it actually, and possibly this is an issue in print too. I guess I never really considered print accessibility very much, but what you can kind of see here is these big gaps that get left, they actually create patterns in the text. So somebody who is easily distracted might lock on to those patterns, and they call them white rivers. And instead of seeing the words, all they can see is the white space in between them. So if you can't see the words, it makes it really hard to read. Um, The next one is line length. This kind of goes hand in hand with the alignment. So ideally, do use shorter lines, shorter line length. Don't use longer full width paragraphs. If you can imagine, especially if something is full width and then you've got a 27-inch monitor with your screen that big, trying to read all the way across, and then, like I said on the previous slide, trying to go from the end of this line and find the beginning of this line when you've got all that screen to cross can be really tricky to find where you are. And it also just becomes harder to scan. And we know that people tend not to read websites in depth, they scan websites. So when you've got narrower text that is left aligned, it's a lot easier to scan and find the information that you're looking for. Couple of do's and don'ts for navigation here. So do make important information easy to find. Do make your site searchable, and do group similar pages into submenus to keep your top navigation short. So making the important information easy to find. If you know that people are always going to this page, whatever that may be, you may want to consider that goes in your top nav. You want to make it really easy for people to get the information that they're trying to find. If you know there's a page that they're struggling to find but that they really need to get to, again, make that really easy in the navigation to find. Having a search in your navigation or in your header area helps people in a variety of ways. So if I've already gone to your site and I know I'm looking for something, but I can't remember what page it was on, having that search can really help. Likewise, if I've never been to your site and I've been, I know that there's probably some information about XYZ on here that I would find useful or interesting. I don't want to have to navigate through your whole homepage hoping to find a link and try to search through every page. Having that search is really, really helpful. And that will help keep people more focused, right? So they'll get less distracted by all of the other things on your page. And then grouping similar pages to keep that top navigation short. So on the flip side, don't build long top menus. They tend to overflow, especially if they start going on to multiple lines. All of those options sort of staring at you when you're trying to figure out where you want to go can be really overwhelming for some people. So if you keep things short and concise and group similar pages together, things that make sense to group together, that will really help people navigate your site. Also, really important, don't hide your contact information. If people need to contact you, we've gotten used to certain standards and norms, right? So contact information is usually like in the top right. If it's not there, usually the next place you go look is in the footer, but almost always like that top right. There's no real reason to deviate from that. Keep it where people expect it. And then also don't create mismatched submenus that don't belong under their parent menu item. People will never find them that way. So keep things short, easy to find, searchable, and that will be really helpful. So also a couple of words on screen readers and captioning. I know that this does fall under either people with audio disabilities or people with visual disabilities, but they aren't actually the only people using screen readers, captioning, transcripts, and subtitles. There are a variety of people who use them for different reasons. And so you want to make sure that when you are putting out content that it can be consumed in multiple ways and that there's the ability to get the audio or the video, or I guess the audio of any video or of text and transcripts of audio or video so that people have access to the content if they can't or prefer not to use your audio or video files. As I said, don't assume screen readers and captioning are only for people with audio and visual disabilities. In addition to somebody, say, who has ADHD, they might find it hard to follow along with the video if they're just watching it. I know there are a lot of people with ADHD who actually need to have multiple things going on at once, things that they're controlling, in order to concentrate on the thing they need to concentrate on. And so having subtitles on a video is really helpful to keep them focused. And then there are also people, if you think about second language learners, they may be using your videos or your audio or the transcripts to help them understand, but also to help them learn. So there's a wide variety of people using screen readers and captioning. Um, and another example, I mentioned the working memory before. Subtitles on a video tutorial, for example, could be really helpful for somebody with working memory issues to follow along and keep on track with what you're saying and showing. Forms are always a fun one for accessibility. So I'm not going to get into all of the different kinds of traps that you could have on forms, but something about labels really important to bring up. Make sure that you are using labels and that you're not using placeholder text as labels. They are not the same. They do not behave the same for screen readers. And also you can see, if you see these pictures, so the first picture here is a form and it has a name input, an email input, and a comment or message input, and they're all properly labeled with those items above the input field. So when I type my name, Christina, into the name field, you can still see it's a name field. On the right side, we've got the same image almost, except instead of those labels, name, email, and contact, comment, or message are put in as placeholder text. So when I start typing my name into the name field, it doesn't say name anymore. And if I don't remember what I was putting there, I can't fill the form out properly anymore. And this has happened to me so many times when there's usually signing up for uh, mail lists of different types, when there's two input fields, and I will often just automatically assume that the order is name and email, but it's not always that way. And so I start typing it in and then all of a sudden realize I don't think this is the right thing, but even backing out doesn't get me the placeholder anymore, and I'm not 100% sure what field I'm in. So you want to make sure that you are using proper labels as placeholder text. Order of elements on your site is important, and that's not just to say how it looks, but also how it works when you are tabbing through a website if you're using keyboard only. So similar to the contact being somewhere where you can see it, stick to web standards and norms, ensure that your tab order is correct, don't be over creative, and don't expect users to understand novel designs. I know that we all want something really cool and interesting on our sites, and there's lots of ways to do that, but you want to stick with staying within the standards and norms that we have kind of all gotten used to, right? Unless you're a really big company that can sort of break the mold. But for most of us, sticking to the standards and norms are going to be what's best. So I have an example here, and this is one that I come across frequently. And I still have to remind myself how to use this. So we've got here a screen grab. It's for an SMS authentication, and it's got my phone number kind of blacked out there, X'd out. And then it says, got a label over an input field that says enter code. And to the right of that input field, it says send code. And that send code button is a very light gray, almost the same color as the white background. And then it's got a blue verify button underneath it. So I cannot tell you how many times I've come to this site, typed in my login creds, got to this page, and sat there waiting, staring at my phone, waiting for my code to send, because the first thing I see here is enter code. So I assume it's automatically sent it to me. Then eventually I remember, right, I have to hit the send the code button. But if you look at this, you don't think, the button after the input field is what I have to hit to get the info to go into the input field. And likewise, if you were tabbing, you would hit the enter code field before you hit the send code field. So this should really be set up in a way that the send code button is above or before the input field for entering the code. Content is another thing that can be really tricky sometimes. And lots of times if you're building out sites and then you hand it over to somebody else to do content, you may have a really accessible site, and then they add all of the content and suddenly we're experiencing some issues. So you want to make sure that when you have content, that your content is easy to understand, and any images or icons that are replacing text make sense. Ideally have labels for them, but if you don't, they really should make sense if they're important. And you want to not use complicated words and phrasing. If you use acronyms, make sure the first time you use them that you spell out what the acronym is for. And metaphors can kind of get tricky sometimes, again, going back to somebody who thinks very literally may not understand what you're getting at. Which isn't to say you can't have fun with your content. Again, I mean, none of this is about trying to take away creativity, but just being aware of how you may impact some people and how some people may not understand what you're trying to say, and so your message will be lost. This is an example that has since been corrected, but this was actually on the WordPress admin dashboard, if you're familiar with the events section, where it tells you all of the events, meetups, WordCamps that are coming up near you. And so it just reads, attend an upcoming event near you. And then there's a blue pencil icon. Now, I don't know about you, but I've gotten used to associating that pencil icon with an ability to edit something. But when I look at this, I don't understand, or I didn't understand what it was that I was expected to edit. Why, how do do I edit the attend? I can't edit events. I just didn't understand how it worked. So one day I just clicked on it and discovered that what it actually did was let you edit the near you part. So it let you edit the location that it was showing you events from. but that was not clear at all. So I ended up actually filing a ticket, and it was remedied. I believe it now has like a locator pin kind of an icon, and I think the wording has changed as well, if I recall correctly, because this was just completely confusing.
Thank you
Talked brief.
so much, Christina. We're nearing the
Oh
end,
no.
the amount of time we have. Do you have any closing thoughts? And I'm going to let you wrap
Yeah,
up here and just letting you know that we're almost out of time.
sure thing. Um, just really quick, I want to just say, make sure that any video and audio automatically playing have pause buttons. Super important. Time pressures you want to reduce as much as possible. And just in closing, going back to that Linux software, our brains aren't all running on the same operating software. And you want to make sure that your website is supporting and accessible to as many options as possible. I do have some links to some resources that I used when I was putting these slides together a while ago. But other than that, that's me. You can find me on Twitter at Amethyst Answers.
Thank you. So her slides are going to be available. They're already out there on the WordPress Accessibility Day website. And what we're going to do now is, if you have unanswered questions, head to the Slack, and hopefully she will monitor the Slack. We're
I
going
will hop in.
to, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So we're going to transition the entire Zoom call now. So this Zoom call is going to end, and participants, to pick up with your next Zoom call, you'll need to go to your email and search for the original email for the next session. And if you don't see it in your inbox, please go ahead and check your spam folder. So rejoin that next one, and the next session is going to be called Accessible Design, WCAG or Trendy? No, WCAG and Trendy. So hashtags again, if you want to go ahead and share the knowledge that you learned, it's hashtag WPA11Y Day and WPAD 2024. Does anybody on the tech team have any other notes? And Christina, we really, really apologize for all of the technical problems.
No worries. I as well. I don't know what happened with that anyways, yes.
The
Ditto.
team did want to express their gratitude for you being able to restart when we needed to. So thanks for that. And
Yep.
we're going to see everybody in the new Zoom call at the top of the hour. Thanks.
Thank you to WordPress Accessibility Day 2024 sponsors. Platinum sponsor 20i. Easily build, deploy, and manage all your projects with 20i managed WordPress hosting. One UI for all your servers, apps, sites, databases, security, DNS, and email. Perfect for agencies, e-commerce, developers, multi-site hosting, and high-traffic sites. Platinum sponsor Equalize Digital. Since all they do is accessibility, every post on their blog is an accessibility resource. You can find webinar recordings, articles, and additional resources at equalizedigital.com/resources. Platinum sponsor WP Engine. WP Engine provides the most relied upon and trusted WordPress products for businesses, brands, and agencies of all sizes. Thanks to our gold sponsors, GoDaddy, Grackle Docs, Gravity Forms, Green Geeks, TPGI, and Yoast. And thank you to our silver sponsors, CodeGeek, Drake Cooper, Elementor, Overnight Website, Pressable, Second Melody, and Accessibility Collective.